Welcome to the Jameson Files. I'm your host, Carrie Weber, and it's so great to have all of you back in the Jameson Files community. Today, we're excited. We have a very special guest who has come to the Jameson offices to be in person with us for this interview. This is Tom Angeloni, the National Sales Director of Bank of America. And we were talking earlier, Tom, we've both been in the industry for about the same amount of time, but it's been over 20 years for you.
Yeah, like a quarter century.
Well,
not to date myself.
When you put it that way,
yeah.
It's a little. But you know, a lot has come and gone, and I'm really excited and very grateful that you've come by to spend some time with us because for those of you out there, whether you are a young dentist starting out looking to get footing into your own practice ownership situation, whether you're a practicing dentist and have been practicing for some time and are looking for opportunities to expand, you may have a lot of questions about financing and what are the things you need to be considering? What is the environment like today, and what are things that you can plan for? So, Tom, I'd really love to have a conversation about that,
Sure.
and love to start out with just giving your perspective on where things have come. You know, after all of this time, where do you see things right now in the dental industry and the dental environment from your perspective?
Well, honestly, it's driven, I think, demographically, right? There's been a lot of states, different territories that were heavily driven by startups. And over the years, depending on where you're at, that has moved more towards acquisitions. I mean, overall, we still find that it's the dental economy is still very strong. Dental spend is up year over year. New graduates, I think the last stat I saw, again, from the ADA, these aren't our statistics, but from the ADA, is that between 2021 and 22, there was an increase, not a huge increase, but about 1.2% increase in graduates. And then over a 5-year span, there's been about a 7% increase in graduates. So you still have a lot of graduates coming out, and the trick is to keep pace with who's retiring. Right?
Yes.
And that's always the trick. So the projections, again, ADA and some different consultants are really looking at it and say over the next, I guess you'd say 8 to 10 years, so 2031, they say that there's going to be a shortage of about 30,000 dental professionals.
Wow.
So you can look at that as, very optimistic and opportunity. There are still, as it stands right now, about level or a little bit more as far as graduates compared to those that are retiring.
Wow, that's
still opportunity there.
And I don't know why that feels surprising to me, but that gives a lot of opportunity to these young dental graduates. You do a lot with dental students and with those new dentists, trying to educate them on what their options are. Yeah. So do we. And, a lot of the questions are, they think they know the direction, but I don't know that they've done a lot of due diligence in terms of how to make the best decisions for the start of their professional career.
Yeah.
Some of you have, but some of you may still be really unclear about how do you get from here to there. And what are some of the questions that you get asked a lot from your perspective from these dentists starting to explore purchasing or even starting up a practice from scratch?
Yeah, I'll tell you probably the most common question in all the lecturing that we do at different dental schools across the country is almost, I'd say, 80% of the time we do this, the question comes up, should I start a practice from scratch, or should I do an acquisition?
Right.
Right. And a lot of people have different opinions, right? There's obviously, when you acquire a practice, you have built-in patient base, you have a staff, you have equipment. It's almost like flick the switch and get going.
Right.
But what I've always seen is it really has so much to do with what the transition plan is. Right?
Yes.
So if you're going to walk in and do what we call like a walk-away acquisition, where a dentist has been there for 30 years, he leaves on a Friday and you come in on a Monday,
right,
and you take over that practice, no transition plan in place, it's hard, right? Because you see a lot of attrition from that because a lot of people have been driving past 3 or 4 dentists to go to that dentist because they have their whole life, and then they leave. Right, and they say, well, there's no reason for me to pass up. I don't know the new person anymore.
Right.
So a walkaway transition, again, I'm not saying there's not opportunities for that. It doesn't work well sometimes, but it is much more difficult. And sometimes, as you know, when you buy a dental practice, you pay a percentage of the revenues. So if you pay it and then all of a sudden you lose 10% from an attrition standpoint, well, you've just lost that. right? So in my experience, the key is to have a very good transition plan.
Yes.
Right? Where the existing dentist is going to stay. You don't want them there for a long time.
Right.
But at least 6 months so you get one rotation.
Yes.
Everybody coming through for hygiene. And then you slowly transition. And when you do that, you don't have as much attrition because they're introducing you every time a new patient comes in, they're introducing you as an associate, and all of a sudden you don't even realize it, and now they're the owner.
Yes.
Right? And when you do it that way and you have a good transition strategy, much less attrition, and that might be a better situation than a startup. Now, the flip side of it is if, when you do an acquisition, you're basically taking over a practice that already has character to it, right? It's already been doing things a certain way. The staff has been doing things a certain way. And as we all know, people are just naturally adverse to change.
Yes.
So you come in and you think that you have a staff. And then you start changing things and you realize, well, the staff doesn't like that and they leave. So in that scenario, it may be better to go ahead and do a scratch startup.
Yes.
You can do things the way you want with your equipment, build your staff how you'd like. So I'm really not for or against either one.
And you do a lot of both.
A lot of both, right? It's really just the transition and where you're at. And if the transition strategy is done right, then maybe it's an acquisition that's best.
And I think this is really great. I mean, I'm glad you brought it up, Tom, because wow, as I think about doctors that we've talked to, practices that we've worked with, conversations that we've had, this is so true. And it's interesting coming from your perspective to also be recommending that, right? Because, and that's something for anyone listening, whether you're the doctor looking to acquire, to think really clearly about before the purchase is made, how are you going to enter into that practice and have that be as successful as possible, as you said. Yeah. But also for those of you that are looking to sell, if you want that practice to be successful long after you're gone, what are you willing to do and what intentional processes are you willing to partner with that buying doctor to help that be that successful transition? I think from both sides of that's a really important thing to consider for the success of the practice and for the patients. I think that's really, and the team. So such a great point that you make there. When you think about purchasing or even the startup or any of these the financial investments that these doctors are going to make, what would you say is important for them to consider long before in preparation for taking these leaps in this next step of their careers?
Yeah. I think what you just said there, preparation, I think that's the key. Right, and by preparation, what I always say is it's vital that you surround yourself with industry-specific people that can advise you. Right, we talked a little earlier about so many come out and say, I want to buy $1 million practice, and you're like, well, maybe you do, but maybe you don't, because there's a big difference between $1 million practice and a profitable practice.
Wow.
Right?
Say that again.
Yes.
Say it again.
Huge difference between $1 million practice, $1 million being produced in the practice, and a profitable practice.
Absolutely.
So many get locked in their head that production is important. I want to buy a practice, or I want to start a practice and get it up to $1 million or 1.5 or $2 million. And if it's not a profitable practice, you don't want that.
Yes.
Right? So having a team of advisors that can come in and look at it and say, okay, well, this practice is doing $1 million or $1.5 million, but overhead is up here, and it's it's not the most profitable practice. So maybe you don't. And you can take that analogy and across to all different aspects of starting a practice or growing a practice and say, look, you really have to have the right people around you to advise you.
Yes.
Right? And that would be from the right dental specific lenders to CPAs to financial analysts to contractors to equipment providers. Right? You really have to take your time and prepare, as you said. And that's whether you're starting or whether you're growing. Right? If you're doing a second or a third practice, you need people that can come in and advise you on, is this the right time to go from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3? Or is my infrastructure set up correctly to go from 3 to 5? Right? We were making jokes earlier that you would think, just like when you have children, right? You have one child and 2 wasn't hard. So you figure, how much harder could 3 be? Right? And then you have the third and you move from like man-to-man defense to zone defense. And it's very similar when you buy practices, right? Going from 1 to 2 isn't all that difficult. can hire an associate, you spend some time there, I'll spend some time here, but then you go to 3, then you go to 4, and you go to 5, and you're saying, I have to, well, who's going to manage all these?
Yes.
And I can't be in 5 places at the same time. So vital to have that group of people around you to advise you on that.
Can I jump on that example that you shared, though? Because there are, something that I see is that in some aspects of the country, and Bank of America is nationwide, so you all see the spectrum of what's happening in the profession. But there are a lot of solo practitioners that are starting to expand into multi-location.
Yeah.
And we were also talking about, obviously we talked before we recorded this, but some of those are successful. Some of them, they do a lot of maybe getting ahead of themselves, quick decisions, not doing the preparing, not doing the process of full preparation and educating themselves. So if there are some of those more established practices watching and listening that are exploring those avenues of expansion in their businesses, any advice that you'd give to them from lessons learned?
I think it's somewhat the same, is make sure you're advised, right? It's very easy to think that, hey, all I have to do is duplicate what I did in practice number 1, and I'm very successful at it, and do that again in practice number 2. Or do that in practice number 3, but there's so much that comes into it, right? If you're going to be a multi-practice owner, one thing is, where and how far away your practice is going to be. Because the last thing you want to do is kind of cannibalize one office to generate revenue in a second office. And so many don't kind of take that in consideration. Run some demographics, see where your patients are coming from. So they're not coming to your new location because it's closer to them, but you've actually negatively impacted your revenue from your first location.
Yes.
So
starving one practice to feed another.
To feed another.
Yeah.
And those are some of the little things that if you're not advised properly, you don't always think of that. You just say, I can do it here, I can do it over there. I can do it here, I can do it over there. And it's so vital. And it has to be the right time for you.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you might be thriving in your first practice, but from a financial standpoint, get the advice of a CPA, again, an industry or dental specific in this case. Get the advice of your financial advisor to make sure that in the whole grand scheme of what you're doing, right, life, business, that this is the right time to do it.
Yes.
Whether you're expanding or whether you're going into multi-practice.
When you think about expanding an existing practice, what does that look like in the conversations that you all have with doctors? Sure. How do you guide them in? I actually just recently worked with a practice that their vision several years from now is to expand the practice that they've already built. And when do you know? When do you know it's the right time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our goal is not to really just give people a bag of money and say, hey, we can approve you, go ahead and expand. Yeah. Right? We're looking at the metrics of the practice, and is this the right time for you to expand, right? Like a general rule of thumb is, and again, it's not everywhere, but in general, we say that you should be doing roughly $30,000 per month per operatory before you really need to equip another operatory to expand, right? If you're not doing that, then more than likely, you're probably not scheduling the way you should be, right? But if you're doing that $25,000 to $30,000 per month per op, and you have people waiting, then maybe it is time to expand, right? But we're not going to tell you to expand just because you can afford it. Right. We're going to look at it and say, well, why don't you just maximize this location? Then we'll talk about expansion. Or maximize what you have now, maybe increase some technology, and then we'll talk about expansion. Again, it's you sit and you have 3 operatories equipped, and the 4th and 5th have been sitting back there not equipped, and it's kind of itchy. I want to equip it. I want to equip it. Right? They're empty. Yes. And very often, to be honest, if you don't have the patient base to fill those seats, it's not the right thing to do. Yeah. And we would never advise you to do that just because you're lendable. Yes. Right? We want to make sure that you've been advised properly, that it is really the right time. It's a big step to invest in another practice or a few more ops.
Yeah. I really like that key metric because, at risk of oversimplifying the whole decision-making scenario, that gives you a really good viewpoint to go look at. Go look at your own numbers. Go look at your own practice performance to determine, is this the right time? I mean, there's always some metrics that you can go look at that help with your decisions for the future. Should I hire another clinician? Should I hire another hygienist? And you can look at metrics for that. And you
That's
also
right.
can do this for the decisions you're making in investing more into your practice or future practices. And something else that I really love that you said, kind of rewinding a little bit, when you were talking about preparing for transition, and also when we were saying it's not just about production, it's about the profit of the practice. Yeah. I think that's really important. You know, Tom's perspective is from those that are getting financing to make these investments, but for those of you that want to sell, it's really important to know these buyers, the potential buyer, the potential doctor that's going to purchase your practice is going to be looking at these numbers too if they're well advised.
Correct.
And so if they're well advised and you have no profit margin or your overhead, love that you pointed that out, your overhead is through the roof, there's work to be done on your side of things to make your practice more attractive to sell. And I think that would be really beneficial for a lot of these doctors. As you said, there's a big exit happening of doctors looking to retire. And if one of you, do your due diligence to make your practice as successful and as clean and as in order as possible, so that when those people start looking, it's pretty difficult to deny the attractiveness of your practice. I just felt like that was a really good
Agreed. I
point.
mean, there's so many things that you need to do when you're preparing to sell.
Yes.
Right. And what unfortunately happens in I'd say maybe too many cases is you start kind of turning things back, right?
Yes.
You say, oh, gosh, I've been working 5 or 6 days a week for 30 years, so I'm going to start thinking about selling in another 3 to 5 years. So you say, well, I'm going to just work 4 days a week instead of 5 or 6 days a week. But obviously what you're doing there is you're going to decrease your revenues over a period of time. So then when you go to sell, you're going to sell for less. So again, it comes back. And again, we're not advisors. I mean, what I'm telling you is just from experience and talking and
what
seeing
you're
people.
seeing day in and day out as some of the premier company, bank that's helping so many dental professionals. And that's something that I love about Bank of America is your long-running experience in dentistry, in healthcare. It just gives you such a great perspective. And I think it's important for doctors to hear that perspective as well. So let's say I am a young dentist and I am, I'm coming up into perhaps this is the year for me. I want to buy a practice. I want to go out on whether I'm graduating or I'm an associate right now or whatever the case may be. What are my steps here? In terms of that preparedness factor, what would you recommend young dentists or doctors that are ready to start exploring a practice purchase?
Sure. That's again a great question. Look, I would say that if you are considering maybe you're a 3rd or 4th year dental student, or maybe just 1 year out associating, what should I be doing right now to be prepared to buy in another couple of years or to start in another couple of years? I would say the most important thing is make sure your finances are in place. So when I go to dental schools, I don't talk about, hey, what we do better than another bank, or what I talk about is how do you prepare for this, right? And the first step is to make sure your finances are in order, right? We all know that if you're in dental school, you're going to have on average $350,000, $400,000, $450,000 in student loan debt, right? But you have to make sure that you have your credit in check, right? And I wouldn't say when you graduate, so many say, I want to get rid of that debt. I want to get rid of that debt. And of course, it's important to decrease your debt. But what happens a lot of times is you take all of your extra money of all of your liquidity and you're paying down your student loan debt, which is probably on the lower interest rate side, right? And then when it comes time to start a practice, right, you don't have that safety net underneath you anymore in case things go a little bit slower. So for a startup, I would say, or a new practice owner, I would say, look, make sure that you're managing your debt. If you're a new coming out of dental school, as much as you want to and probably deserve to go get the BMW and the expensive house, just maybe take a step back. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a car. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a house. But just put away the $1 million mansion and the $100,000 car. Be kind of relatively kind of modest with your spending, and there'll be time, right? You'll get to that Taj Mahal dental practice. You'll be able to buy the boat and the mansion and the cars. But so many come out and say, "Gosh, I've been struggling so long. Now I'm a dentist. Now I'm a doctor. I'm going to go get this." right? So I would just say, make your monthly payments, hold on to some of your cash so you have it, for a rainy day or a safety net. And then you'll be in prime position to start off successfully, right?
Yes.
And you won't be crushed with so much debt service every single month. And then, as far as you've been out, you've been associating, as far as the timeline, one of the first things you do is consult your financial analyst or consult your CPA and make sure that this is the right time for you to start a practice, right? And then the next thing usually is then to say, okay, well, how lendable am I? Like, who will give me enough money?
Right.
And we all know that there's dental-specific lenders, different ones, and we all love lending to dentists, but you have to make sure it's the right time for you, right?
Yes.
And then you have to make sure, well, do I want to lease a space or do I want to buy land and build a building?
Right.
And that's a very difficult decision. There's the financial part of that, but the one that's always missed is, do I want to live here? Do I want to raise my family
Yes.
here? Do I like the schools here? Is the economy where I want to build this, is it strong? Do I want to be here? Not just because you got a good deal on a piece of land or a good deal on a building. You have to make sure this is where you want to live for a long time. Because as many of you know, it's very difficult to sell a dental practice or to sell a building that is dental, right? If somebody wants to come in and make office space out of that, well, you have plumbing in every room. You have med gas either going over top or going underneath.
Right.
And they pretty much have to gut the place just to make it office buildings again.
Yes.
So it's very important that you're advised by the right people and that you're thinking through all this, not just I can get this land cheap and this building cheap, but man, if I don't want to be here, I could wind up taking a loss on this to move out.
Wow.
So it's really important to get advised.
That's some guru wisdom right there because, for any of you that are listening, really the takeaway is be smart, take your time, think it through, get a clear vision, be patient, and
get help.
Get help, and have people giving you experienced advice so that you make the smart choices now. So you're not paying for the wrong choices later.
Right.
So I love that, Tom. If there are some doctors out there that are looking at opportunities in the near future, how can they reach? What are their steps to reach out to those representatives that can help them at Bank of America?
You can pull us up online, and we have upwards of 70 business development officers in all major metropolitan areas that cover the territory, and we can connect you right with them. Simply online. There's a lot of choices out there, and a lot of good choices. I'll be honest, there's others that do dental specific lending. I will tell you that the one thing we do a little bit different is we're not just interested in the loan, right?
Right.
The loan is about 5% of what a dentist really needs to start or expand. Then when you start looking into it, it's well, how do I take payments? Like, what do I do about swiping a credit card? And how should I set up my operating accounts so that I have operating accounts separate for my supplies than I do for my accounts receivables? And just so much more that goes. How do I do QuickBooks? How do I pay my staff? Is it time? Should I offer them benefit? I mean, there's so much that goes into it that we're really not in this to just say, hey, you're lendable. Here's a bag of money. Good luck. Start paying us back in 90 days.
Right.
We really want to look at the whole picture and how do we best put you in a position to be successful. And that might not always be by giving you the $1 million loan that you want. It might be said, well, maybe do a little startup over here for $600,000 or $700,000 and then grow into that. So again, we're just not after the quick, here's your money and go.
Yes.
We want to make sure, and we've been doing this Bank of America Practice Solutions for upwards of about 27 years.
Yes.
So we definitely know what goes into it more than just can you afford the loan payment.
Absolutely.
Right. So that's really where I just see a little bit of the difference. And again, that's not talking poorly about any others out there because there's a lot of good lenders out there. But make sure it's dental specific, and we'd love to just kind of teach you about everything.
Yes.
Everything that you need in addition to the loan.
I think, so my big takeaways are take your time, think it through, be smart. Probably the time is now to start preparing yourself for that moment in the future when you are ready to make that investment and move into that next chapter in your dental journey. And to make sure that you have advisors and experts in the industry that are familiar with your world to help you make the best decisions for the most successful future possible. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining me. And thanks to all of you for being with us on another episode of the Jameson Files. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Jameson Files. Visit us online at jmsn.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, or Spotify. See you next time.